Potter and the Half-Blood Prince was released in 2009 and was directed once again by David Yates and is based on the book of the same name by J.K. Rowling and stars Daniel Radcliffe, Rupert Grint, and Emma Watson. This time, the film follows Harry Potter during his 6th year at Hogwarts, where he discovers an old book marked as the property of the Half-Blood Prince, and begins to learn more about Lord Voldemort's dark past. I remember the amount of hype I had for this movie when it was coming out. Out of all the Harry Potter movies that had come out, Half-Blood Prince was my most anticipated because it's my favorite book in the entire franchise. And David Yates won me over with his direction for Order of the Phoenix. So I had hope that this film was in the right hands. But when I finally saw the film, as a book fan, I was met with disappointment. And as a fan of the films as well, I was left a bit disappointed as well. Everything I felt Yates was good at in Order of the Phoenix, I felt he was the exact opposite with this film. And as a book fan, I was disappointed that the film seemed to focus on all the wrong things, and turned one of, if not the darkest Harry Potter story, into a teen rom-com. I was disappointed because the film lacked the full meat of what made the story so engaging in the first place. All the flashbacks learning about Voldemort's past were stripped down, and more time was devoted for the teen romance angle. And I just, in the end, felt very let down. But I wanted to get this disappointment out of the way before the actual review, because I'm not reviewing this film as an adaptation, but as a film. And despite my disappointment at the things they decided to admit, the film still disappoints in other ways. But I have to say, the more I have watched this film over the years, the more I actually do like it. But my biggest problem and the film's biggest flaw is the inconsistency in its tone, the writing, and how it's directed. That said, though, I still like this film. There's not a bad Harry Potter film in my eyes, but this will always remain my least favorite in the franchise. But before we get into what I think of the film, let's do what we always do here and go behind the scenes to see just how this film was made. Before David Yates had officially signed on to direct the 6th film, many other directors had expressed interest in directing, and this included Alfonso Cuarón, who stated he would love the opportunity to return. And Guillermo del Toro had even been approached, but turned it down to instead direct Hellboy 2: The Golden Army. It was actually while Order of the Phoenix was still in production that Yates was finally asked to direct the next film after producers were pleased with his direction. Radcliffe and Grint were initially hesitant to reprise their roles, but eventually agreed, as did Emma Watson, who cited a fear of being typecast, but eventually returned due to the pluses outweighing the minuses in her eyes, believing that she couldn't bear to see anyone else play Hermione. Nicholas Hooper also returned to compose the film, and included a reworking of John Williams' Hedwig theme. Other members of the crew, like production designer Stuart Craig, costume designer Janie Timney, and visual effects supervisor Tim Burke, creature and makeup effects designer Nick Dudman, and special effects supervisor John Richardson returned to work on the film as well. Christian Coulson, who played Tom Riddle in Chamber of Secrets, had expressed interest in returning to the role in flashbacks, but Yates responded that Coulson was just too old to be playing the role. The role would eventually go to Hero Fiennes Tiffin, Ralph Fiennes' nephew, as the young Tom Riddle, and Frank Dillon as the teen Tom Riddle. Other new cast members included Helen McCroy, who appears as Narcissa Malfoy, who was originally cast as Bellatrix in Order of the Phoenix before having to drop out. Stuart Craig designed several new sets for the film, including Tom Riddle's orphanage, the astronomy tower, and the cave. The scene in the cave ended up taking nearly 3 to 4 months to prepare. Also, some of the Hogwarts sets were taken down after the filming since they would not be used in the following film. Principal photography finally began on September 24th, 2007 and ended in May of the following year. A series of night scenes were filmed in the village of Lecoq for 3 nights where they filmed the early scenes of the movie as well as Surbiton railway station and the Millennium Bridge in London, where the film begins. When it came to the cinematography, changes were made as Warner Brothers specifically asked to add more color to the film. Yates didn't want to lose the very European look of the film, but after the movie was retouched, he said, "It's not what you wanted, but we're happy with it." The studio ended up being pleased with the changes overall. One of the major challenges for the film ended up being the lighting. Bruno Delbonnel didn't want to change the lighting effects and finally decided to give the film a darker, moody variation of gray. Changes from the book to the movie included added scenes only mentioned in the book in passing, as well as cutting out the Dursleys to break the pattern, as Steve Kloves said, who returned to writing for this film. Flashbacks, which included Tom Riddle's family, were also cut to put the focus mainly on Riddle. An action scene at the Burrow was also added to the film to inject jeopardy and danger into the film, as Yates believed without it there was too much comedy and lightness in the film. A small battle at Hogwarts was also cut so that they could wait for the Battle of Hogwarts in the final film. The movie was originally intended for release on November of 2008, but was pushed back to July 15th of 2009 despite the film being complete, which was done to ensure Warner Brothers had a big summer release in 2009 due to the 2007 and 2009 writer's strike. The film had an estimated gross of $250 million, making it one of the most expensive films ever made, and the most expensive Harry Potter film in the franchise, and went on to gross $934.5 million at the worldwide box office. The film was also well received upon its release, praising the performances, direction, and cinematography, but criticism was placed on the teen romance aspect of the film and the movie's subplots. I also have heard that the teen romance aspect of the film was desired by Warner Brothers, who wanted to have a lighter film before the final 2 films, which we'll get into more about how well that worked out looking on with my own thoughts. And with that said, let's actually move right along to my thoughts on the film. Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince is without a doubt my least favorite Harry Potter movie. It has its moments, but it sadly falls flat for me during the majority of the film's second act. And it's a shame because I think if they hadn't leaned so heavily into the romantic comedy aspect of the film, we would have had not only the darkest Harry Potter film, but quite possibly the best Harry Potter film of them all. I don't hate this movie. I don't think the film itself is bad, but every time I watch this movie, I'm left disappointed and left wondering what could have been. Half-Blood Prince does have a lot going for it, though, that I obviously want to bring up. For one, I think the acting once again shines, and not just from the adult actors, but our leads as well. Daniel Radcliffe I find to be very good in this film. He's improved so much with every film. And it's very interesting to me that I find him so good in this film when Daniel Radcliffe has stated how he hates his performance in it, which I just can't agree with. There's also a moment in the film where Radcliffe is just pure gold, and it's by far the funniest scene in the entire film, where Harry takes the potion Felix Felicis, which gives him good luck for a few hours, and he's just so happy and joyful and perky. It's so different from what we're used to with this character, and it makes for a series of scenes that's probably the funniest out of the entire franchise. The film also attempts to add an obsession for Harry in the form of a potions book with annotations from someone calling themselves the Half-Blood Prince. Harry uses this book and obsesses over it to become top of his class in potions, as well as learning several interesting and devastating spells. I just wish the film had shown more of this obsessive side that Harry adopts, because it just doesn't always work, but it's a great idea too. Other characters get their time to shine as well, such as Rupert Grint as Ron, who becomes the keeper for the Gryffindor Quidditch team, and he finally feels as if he's good at something. Rupert Grint is great here, despite being the weakest actor, I feel, of the trio. I like, too, how we finally get to see Ron and Hermione pretty much getting together in the funniest way possible, too, in a scene where Ron, in his sleep, starts calling out Hermione's name instead of his own girlfriend's. Then there's Tom Felton, who I feel like I haven't talked about at all during these reviews. But finally, after years of simply playing the bully, Draco Malfoy, Tom Felton is given some real meat to chew in his role as they turn Malfoy into a much more emotionally complex character, as he has been given the mission to kill Dumbledore. But you can tell his heart just isn't in it. There's many scenes of him skulking around in silence, crying, scared of what he has to do, and it's some of my favorite moments in the film. There's just a real sense of dread in this movie that I love, and I wish the entire film felt like this. Right from the opening scene, we are hit with the suggested tone of the film. The wizarding world is at war, and we are truly in dark times. The world is no longer safe from Voldemort anymore, and it makes for a very bleak film. Dumbledore's speech at the Hogwarts feast isn't happy or filled with energy. There's nothing but dread and fear left. Then we match that with what Draco's doing, and we get just a very dour film, and I love it. One of my favorite scenes in the movie is actually when Dumbledore has Harry enter an old memory of his, where we see a younger Dumbledore visiting a young Tom Riddle at an orphanage. And this scene is just perfectly executed. It's dark, mysterious, and has that feeling of dread that I was loving in this film. Match that with Hero Finds Tiffin's chilling performance as we see a young Voldemort before he becomes the Dark Wizard we know him as. It makes for one memorable scene. I also have to say the entire third act of this movie is one of the best third acts in this franchise. I don't think it's as perfectly executed as the third act in, say, Goblet of Fire, but it's up there for me. The entire movie, Harry's been learning about Voldemort and how to actually defeat him, which it turns out you have to destroy these objects that Voldemort has created called Horcruxes, where he has split his soul in 7 parts, and Dumbledore believes he's found one. And so he and Harry visit this cave to retrieve it. And what we get here is one of the best and darkest scenes in this entire franchise. As to retrieve the Horcrux, Dumbledore has to drink this liquid, which causes him so much agonizing pain. He keeps yelling about it's his fault and for someone to kill him. And it's really heartbreaking seeing the wise and noble Dumbledore in a moment of weakness. Follow that up with an attack by some zombies known as Inferi. We have a truly epic scene with Dumbledore showcasing some powerful magic in the form of a wall of fire. Mix that with the score for the scene, and you have perfection. Then we have the climax of Draco attempting to kill Dumbledore, only to have Snape do it in the end. It's so well done, and when the entire school is out of their beds and comes to the fallen headmaster, and everyone puts their wands up in the air in memoriam, it's chilling and heartbreaking, and again, one of the best moments of the franchise. Though I don't think this death is nearly as effective as Cedric's in Goblet of Fire. Another moment I really enjoyed in the film is a scene that involves Harry using the Felix Felicis. Harry visits Hagrid with Professor Slughorn, where we get a burial of the spider Aragog, which is absolutely hilarious, and that's followed by a scene of Hagrid and Slughorn drunkenly singing. But the real moment I love, and it's not even a moment in the books, but is just so well written, it's when Slughorn tells Harry about a gift gifted to him by his mother. It's a wonderful and sweet moment that feels like it could have come straight from the books. I love it. And since we haven't mentioned him yet, let's go ahead and bring up Professor Slughorn. Jim Broadbent plays Horace Slughorn, who ends up being the new potions master at Hogwarts. And this character and performance are just perfect. This is one of my favorite Harry Potter supporting characters. He's funny and so interesting, and Jim Broadbent just makes Slughorn so likable, even if he can get on your nerves with how dismissive he can be towards people he doesn't have a fascination with. I love him, and he's a great addition to the film and leads to some very funny moments in the movie. Before we get into my negatives with the film, though, I want to bring up the music for the movie. Nicholas Hooper's score is fantastic, and in my opinion, the best we've seen in the franchise since the third film. I enjoyed many of his themes in Order of the Phoenix, but in this movie, he brings even more to offer with much more moodier pieces that really fit well with the dark tone the film is trying to go for. The music in the opening of the film is haunting, and Dumbledore's triumphant moment in the cave are two of the standouts. Now, we must sadly talk about what holds this movie back from being that perfect Harry Potter film I feel like it could have been. And my biggest problem with the movie is honestly the tone. I've talked constantly about the darker tone of the film in my positives, and that is true. The film has a dark tone, but sadly it's in battle with a completely separate tone that doesn't mesh well. The film is in a constant struggle as to what it wants to be, a dark, moody film or a teen comedy, and that for me is where the film falls flat. The entire middle of this movie is littered with teen romance and quirky, awkward humor that feels like it belongs in another movie. Now, I have heard that Warner Brothers wanted a lighter film, and that would make sense why these teen romance scenes just don't work. Also, the comedy in these scenes are kind of just not funny and feels forced, and again, I don't know all the details. But it does feel like studio interference in this regard because it just doesn't gel. And the worst part for me is the romance that blossoms between Ginny Weasley and Harry. It just ends up being very awkward and unnatural. And combine that with the total lack of chemistry between Bonnie Wright and Daniel Radcliffe, and you have a recipe for disaster. There's just no spark, and I feel bad for saying this, but Bonnie Wright just lacks any charisma that this role should have. And some of this sadly comes down to the writing, which I don't feel is all Steve Kloves' fault, seeing as I've enjoyed much of his writing up to this point. It's also a problem with the directing as well. I defended and praised the hell out of David Yates' direction in Order of the Phoenix, but I just feel like he's not a good fit here and out of his element directing these playful romantic scenes. It's just awkward from the staging of these scenes. And again, I know I praised the staging of scenes in the previous review, but it worked in that film as Harry is supposed to be isolated from people and feel alone. But the same staging happens in this film where it just doesn't make as much sense and ends up just feeling bland in comparison. I also have to knock on the color grading of this film. I'm just going to say it. Half-Blood Prince is a really ugly looking film to me. All I can think of when watching the film is the color brown. There's some scenes where it looks alright, but most of the time it makes the film just way too dark and hard to see. I just can't believe this is the compromise that was made for the color grading, and I wish they had gone with the look they were originally going to go with, which was what we saw in Order of the Phoenix. Instead, we get something that's just not appealing to look at in my eyes. The only time I think the color grading truly works in the film's favor is when we're inside the cave and the film almost becomes completely black and white. It works for that scene and is a nice change from the rest of the film. In the end, Half-Blood Prince is a Harry Potter film that's just good. It has great moments, some of my favorites in the whole franchise, but the comedy and romantic elements which make up the middle of the film hurt a film that's truly wanting to be a dark, moody piece. And I just wish it could have been that, because that's where the film shines, especially with its music, performances, and finale. But with all of that said, I'm gonna give Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince a 7 out of 10. 7 out of 10 is still pretty good, but it's disappointing when the film could have so easily been much higher if it had stuck the landing and didn't have the tonal issues it has, because I think this could have truly been a great Harry Potter film, but it's ultimately just a good one with some lackluster moments. But what do you think of Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince? Let me know, and as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel, and stay positive.